Jeremiah has for decades preached to the people. He told them the Babylonians were going to come. He told them Jerusalem was going to fall. And for that, they threw him into a well. They held him captive, threatened him. He was mocked mercilessly. Well, the day came, and Babylon ransacked the city. Jerusalem was overtaken by the Babylonians. And for it, the Babylonians took all of those able-bodied men, women, and children and put them in chains and corralled them like cattle as he began to march them, as the Babylonian army began to march them back to Babylon. They were captives. And there in the midst of them, in the midst of all of the captives, there was Jeremiah, the very one who had been preaching that Jerusalem would fall, that they needed to turn back to God, repent of their sins. Herded like cattle. You can see them walking in their chains, with their faces drawn, looking down at the ground. Really no real hope for their future. And right there in the middle of them is Jeremiah. But then something strange happens. The captain of the guard pulls Jeremiah out of the crowd, unshackles him, and says, "We know that what you've been preaching, what you have been saying has come true." And he said, "So here is what we're going to do. We're going to take off your chains, and we're going to allow you to come to Babylon. And if you come to Babylon, you'll have no wants. Everything will be provided for you. You'll be watched over. No longer will people mock you. No longer will people put you in chains. No longer will you be arrested. You will come and really live in luxury with the king's protection." No, at this point, Jeremiah's getting older. He's at a retirement age. He's been doing this for decades with no results. People have continually opposed him, have not listened to him. And now he has the opportunity really to go and retire, to live in a luxury in Babylon where they would look after him, look over him. The captain of the guard said, "You can come to Babylon where you'll have all your needs met. You can do anything you wish. You'll never be hungry. You'll never be in fear again. Never again will you be ridiculed. Or you can go back to Jerusalem." Now, there's not much left in Jerusalem. The city's been ransacked. The city's an absolute mess. The vast majority of people are gone. There's only a small remnant left, and the ones that are left are the ones that couldn't travel, that really the Babylonians saw no use for. And they're the ones that they left behind. And Jeremiah stands there, and it doesn't say he waited at all. It doesn't say he weighed the pros and he weighed the cons and he said, "Let me think about it." He said he'd go back to Jerusalem because that's where God wanted him to be. And so he left. He left those that were heading into captivity, whereas he himself wouldn't have been captive. He would have been really free, taken care of, but he returns to a city that has been decimated, a city that's been destroyed, a city where there's not much left at all. But all's not lost. One of Jeremiah's friends was appointed as governor in Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar appointed a governor to look over, to administrate the city and those that were left behind. And he wasn't too bad of a person. People knew him. In a lot of ways, people trusted him. They thought, you know what, this can't be too bad. Maybe things are going to be okay. And this governor had ruled just a short time when he was dining with some others that he knew and trusted. A man named Ishmael. And he and some thugs, some criminals, some traitors murdered the governor at the end of their dinner together. And then not only that, there were some visitors that had come into town And when they came into town, these men, this gang who had just murdered the governor that was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, murdered all of these other men as well. And they took all the bodies and threw them into a cistern, into water, to hide their bodies, to get rid of them. And the people became terrified. That little sliver of hope that they had, the tiny amount of hope that they saw in their future, seemed to have been taken away at that moment. Because Nebuchadnezzar had appointed a governor that was okay with them. But now this governor has been murdered, has been assassinated, and they are sure the wrath of Babylon, the wrath of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, is going to be poured out onto them, and those that are left, and the little that's standing, will be crushed. And they're terrified and afraid of what's going to happen. So they turn to the only one who had been right the entire time. The only one who called it as it was. That prophesied the truth. And they turned to Jeremiah. And they said, Jeremiah, we need to know what to do. We need to know how to face this situation. We need you to tell us what needs to be done. How many of you have ever been asked what you thought? And then you tell somebody what your opinion is, and then they go and they do the exact opposite of what you said. And you say, why did you even ask me if you weren't going to listen to me? It's exactly what happened. They asked Jeremiah and they said, tell us, Jeremiah, what we're to do. And he says, God says, stay here. If you will remain in this land, then I will build you up and not pull you down. I will plant you and not pluck you up. He said, if you stay, God promises to build you up, to not pull you down, to plant you and not pluck you up. In other words, he's promising them their future once again. Once again, he's telling them, if you will just stay and be faithful to me, if you will stay and have patience with the plan that I have, knowing that it's not going to happen today, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but have patience and understand that my promises will come to pass. He says, I will build you up. And he says, and don't worry about Nebuchadnezzar. He says, don't worry about it. He said, do not fear the king of Babylon, of whom you are afraid. Do not fear him, declares the Lord, for I am with you, to save you and to deliver you from his hand. I will grant you mercy, that he may have mercy on you and let you remain in your own land. I don't know that it could have been any clearer. And I can see them as Jeremiah is expressing and conveying what God's will is, and the very voice of God coming out of Jeremiah, and they all stand there with their eyes wide, just looking, and as soon as he finishes it, they go, nope, we're going to go to Egypt. And that's what they did. Oh, the irony. They wanted to go back to Egypt. Generations before, God had delivered them out of Egypt. He had taken them out of captivity. He had told them there is a promise that I will fulfill the promise that I gave Abraham. And he brought them out of captivity. Remember, they had been waiting for centuries. And God finally says, it's time. Let's go. Let's get out of Egypt. Let's go into the promised land. Finally, their patience had paid off. God brought them. He put them here in this promised land. And generations after that, now they're wanting to go back to that in which they were captive. Tell me that that makes sense. But yet it does. Because our human nature is to go and to those places in which we're comfortable. We would rather go to the known than to trust God in the midst of the unknown. See, they knew what to expect in Egypt. Oh yeah, they had been slaves. Yes, they had been in captivity. No, they weren't able to worship God in the manners that He prescribed, but they knew what to expect. They thought if we can just get back to Egypt, we'll be protected. Pharaoh will watch over us. We'll probably be slaves, but at least we'll have a roof over our head. At least nothing will come to harm over us. We're going to leave all of this, even though God said, stay, be patient. Don't leave, I'll protect you. Once again, they lacked that patience. And they returned to that which they knew. So often, we would rather return. No matter how bad it was, no matter the struggle and turmoil it caused in our life, we would rather return back to that which we know. They hadn't learned patience. And patience and faith are close, like brother and sister. Faith and patience. But nobody wants to learn patience. Did you ever see this? I saw this years ago. It was a test. It was a hidden camera where they took all of these little kids. I think they were like age 3. They stuck them in a room and they put them at a table. And in front of them they put a plate and a single big, fluffy, tasty marshmallow. And they told the kids, they said, if you will not eat this marshmallow until I come back, you'll get 2 marshmallows. And so they would leave. And the vast majority of those little kids, the moment they walked out the door, one of them grabbed it and went. Another little kid picked it up at the very edges and just began to nibble off the very corners as he looked at the door. Another one picked it up and just began to lick it. One of them took just a little bite and put it back. Then he took another bite and put that back. Then he looked and realized it was already half eaten, so he just ate the whole thing. But then there were just a couple that sat there and looked at the marshmallow and waited and had patience. Now I remember, right, the purpose of it was that you were supposed to be able to tell a lot about a person as they're an adult by how they face the marshmallow. Whether you're somebody that can hold off or somebody that has to have everything right then, or you learn patience. I always thought, what a great picture of human nature. Patience. It's not most of our best qualities. The Bible talks a lot about patience because God's timetable is rarely on our timetable. So the Bible is full of instances and stories where men and women must learn patience in the midst of what they're going through, waiting on God to fulfill or answer the promises that they have, waiting on God to bring this overwhelming victory, waiting for God to fulfill the promises and the hope that He had given. In James chapter 5, James talks about prophets just like Jeremiah. And he says this, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remained steadfast. He says, as an example, look at Jeremiah. Someone who had to have patience, someone who had an example of suffering, who spoke in the name of the Lord, but they were blessed because they had patience. They were blessed because they continued on. Despite not seeing God fulfill, despite not seeing all the promises that God had given happen in their lifetime, they continued to be patient and were steadfast. So 3 principles this morning of patience that I'm going to share with you. Number 1 is this. Circumstances are uncontrollable, but God is in control. Circumstances in your life are uncontrollable. Many of them. You can't do anything about them. There's many things in our lives that we can't control. James here in chapter 5, verse 7, he says it like this. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and late rain. He says, be patient until the coming of the Lord. And he uses this illustration of a farmer and how a farmer plants, but then a farmer has to be patient. There are no crops that you plant at night and the next morning you get up and harvest them. There is a period of patience that has to take place. As the plants, as the seeds germinate and they begin to grow, you have to wait, just like the farmer waits. And the farmer has many uncontrollables. He can't control the weather. He can't control rain. He can't control animals or pests. He can try, but they may be outside of his control. But yet he continues to have to be patient. We can't control the weather. You can't control the economy. If you could control it, you could run it better than the government. But you can't control it. You can't control so many areas in our life, but yet we try to control. How many of you know how you try to control the uncontrollable? What do? You worry. Because that's the only thing you can do. When there is something out of your control, many people just begin to worry about it, as if worry does anything. But that's the only thing you know to do. You think, I can't control this? I can't do anything about it? I'm just going to worry about it. And worrying has really worked, hasn't it, for you? It really helps. No, it doesn't. But yet, that's how we try to control. We worry over and over again. But we're commanded to be patient. And he says, because the Lord's coming back. Because the Lord's coming near. Be patient until the coming of the Lord. 3 different times in this section here in James, we're told about the coming of the Lord. Do you know why? It's a reminder that yes, the Lord is coming. He is returning. But it doesn't happen on your timetable. You can't do anything about the Lord's return. Nobody knows the day, the hour. Nobody can control that. But how do you know God knows the time? God has a timeline. So we have nothing to do except be patient and wait for his return. We can't do anything. His timeline is his own timeline. We can't control it. And so all we can do is be patient and wait for the returning of the Lord. Everything's on schedule. It may not seem like it's on schedule. It may seem like it's all off. But it's on schedule. And we simply have to learn to be patient. So when their circumstances are uncontrollable, and also that people are unchangeable. In verse 10 of James 5, it says, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remained steadfast. As we've looked over the last few weeks, the role of Jeremiah, the role of the prophets, was to get the people to turn back to God, to get the people to listen to the voice of God, to get them to change their ways, to become different, to go a different direction. But how many know that people resist change, even when it's good for them? They resent suggestions. In fact, there's some people you say, well, the sky is blue, and they go, no, it's green. They just want to argue. There are certain people that just blow up when you tell them anything, and because that's human nature, and that's what happened to the prophets. That's what happened to Jeremiah over and over again. He brought the word of the Lord, and they continued to stand against him, and they refused to be turned. They refused to change their behavior. And Jeremiah had to be patient. The prophet, he was misunderstood. We saw that he was discouraged many times. We saw that he was thrown in the bottom of a well, that he was put in stocks, he was put in chains. But we consider blessed, it says, those who remained steadfast, or those that persevered, or those that were patient. There's blessing in patience. There's blessing that comes when you're patient and you wait on the Lord. If it was easy, there would be no problem with patience. If it was easy, none of us would struggle with waiting or being patient on God. But it's not easy. It's rarely easy. And Jesus says in Matthew 5, he said, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven." Jeremiah was persecuted. They said false things against him. They were evil against him. But there was a reward in heaven because he was patient. There was a reward in heaven that even though the circumstances around him came against him, even though people refused to change, even though they came down on him, there was a reward, there was a blessing from God on those who are patiently waiting on him. So we wait. We wait on God, even when people are unchangeable, because he blesses, because he rewards. Thirdly, lastly, problems are unexplainable, but God is still working. How many understand every problem and valley you faced in your life? Have you understood all of them? Everything that you faced? Maybe you're struggling right now. Maybe you're, what we talked about a couple weeks ago, you're in that battle and maybe you don't understand it. It's unexplainable. Verse 11, it says, "You have heard the steadfastness of Job. You have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful." The patience of Job. Who wants to learn the patience of Job? Need I remind you what Job went through? He was the wealthiest in all of the known world, committed to God. And yet, in 2 short days, he lost it all. He lost his family. He lost his friends. He lost all of his wealth. He lost his health. His children were murdered. He went bankrupt. He had a painful, incurable disease that the only relief he had was that dogs licked his wounds and sores on his body. How many know it's bad when the best you got is dogs licking sores on your body? And we think we have problems. His life was turned upside down. His wife looks and says, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" Thank God for supportive spouses. And yet, there was no apparent reason. Job didn't see it. Nobody around him saw it. There seemed to be no reason for the circumstances that he was in. They were unexplainable. It was a result of an event in the supernatural, spiritual realm that was affecting the physical realm in which he was in. But he didn't know that. He didn't understand it. He had no idea what was going on. Why me, God? Why? And for 37 chapters in Job, God said nothing. You ever been there? You're in the unexplainable. Doesn't make sense what you're going through. You're facing a crisis. Life isn't making sense. It's like dominoes that are falling. It's just one thing after another. You cry out to God, and he says nothing. Job was at the very end. He had nothing left. Nothing. And God was silent. But Job persevered. Job had patience. He refused to give up. Was it fair? No. And let me let you in on a secret. Life's not fair. I love saying that in my house. Don't I? It's not fair. Yeah, life's not fair. I also like telling them it's not a democracy. The other day I told them, I don't know what they were doing. And they said, well, we don't want to do that. I said, well, you don't live in a democracy. And one of them said, what's a democracy? I said, to be honest, I'm not sure anymore. But life's not fair. Sometimes you just can't figure out your problems. But know this. While you're waiting, while the unexplainable is going on around you, while the world doesn't seem fair, when everything seems to be falling apart and the dominoes of life are just falling left and right, God is still working on your behalf. He's still working on your problem. He's still working for you. No matter what you're facing, no matter what the unexplainable is, no matter what the circumstances are, God is working on your behalf. Hebrews tells us that Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father, interceding for you and I. Jesus interceding for me and you on our behalf. There is work that is taking place in heavenly realms for you and I. Philippians 2:13 says, God is at work within you. Romans 8:28 says, in all things God is working. He is working on your behalf. Now, it may not seem like it. For Job, it didn't seem like it. He had lost it all. You may be looking at your circumstances. You may be looking at your life. You may be looking at your family. You may be looking at your marriage. You may be looking at your finances. You may be looking at all the things going on around you, and you don't see it, but God is working on your behalf. If you're a believer, if you're a son, a daughter of Jesus Christ, if you're part of His family, He is working on your behalf. You don't have to see it. Just believe it because His Word says it. But that's what patience is. It's waiting in the midst of suffering. It's waiting in the midst of the unknown. It's waiting in the midst of the unexplainable when you don't understand. That's what patience is. But nobody wants that. But yet we're required. He requires it of us. He required it of the remnant that was left in Jerusalem. Have patience, persevere, wait. He had it for Job. Wait, persevere, have patience. And He would say to you this morning that you're facing the unexplainable. He's saying, wait, have patience, persevere. Wait, have patience, persevere. I don't understand. Have patience. But Lord, look what I'm facing. Have patience. But God, I don't understand. Have patience. He who began a good work in you is faithful and just to complete that work that He began in your life. He is working on your behalf. You don't have to see it. It's unexplainable. It's unchangeable. And it's uncontrollable. You may be in some uncontrollable circumstances. You may be in some unexplainable situations. So what do? You have patience. And you trust. And you don't give up. And you stay on your knees in prayer. And you stick your head in God's Word. And you continue to have patience. And allow Him to work on your behalf. And don't give up. Don't give up. Because in all things, God is working together for the good. Do you believe that?